4, 3, 2, 1.
Education is the process of learning and receiving knowledge or information. With that being said, education is a blessing and sets the foundation for future generations. In the case of education in America, the government requires children to attend school until the age of 16. Thus, America puts a high importance on education. But what happens when there's flaws within the education system? Well, we'll be jeopardizing the fate of the US because future generations won't be able to attain the sufficient knowledge that's needed, ultimately leading to the demise of our nation.
This leads to our research questions, which is, to what extent does the perception of education in America affect K-12 schools and funding and the quality of its education?
One solution that we'll suggest later on is to have the political bodies responsible for education devote more attention to minority-serving educational institutions. According to a law journal published by Birmingham Young University in regards to McDuffie versus Massachusetts, here, the court found inadequacy with the district funding systems and ordered that the state to take steps to equalize funding disparity between districts. The court finding inadequacy within the funding in Massachusetts back in 1993 was one of the first steps of progress. The issue is that although an issue was presented and changes were ordered to be made, it was found that after the case, minimal progress was made by the state after 10 years.
This leaves the issue in the hands of legislators. The issue around school funding was addressed, but improvement by the states was painfully slow. Since states control the education system within a territory, challenging the issue around school funding can be difficult at the national level.
An example of states having different views on education is when the governor of Florida recently made the decision to censor topics such as slavery, gender identity, the LGBTQ+ community, and banning AP African American Studies to be taught in public schools.
The majority of school funding depends on local resources, such as state funding and local property taxes, so we concluded that minority-serving educational institutions face insignificant funding due to the fact that minorities comprise the majority of the low-income population. While schools zoned around well-established families, particularly white families, are flourishing.
Not all states are on board with the idea of pushing for reforms that address the funding issues between schools and districts. This is reinforced by the fact that privileged students are facing fewer difficulties, while schools with higher levels of poverty aren't receiving the attention and the funding they need.
For instance, states such as Nevada are doing minimal effort or nothing at all to address the school funding issue. This contradicts the American dream because America takes great pride in equal opportunities, but minorities have yet to obtain equal educational opportunities within all 50 states.
A recent trend pointed out that a majority of states transition to a performance-based funding model for schools, which worsens the economic problem that districts with medium and higher degrees of poverty face. Historically, these districts have suffered from funding previously due to legislators turning a blind eye to them. Thus, it's common for them not to have enough money for providing resources to their special needs students, such as language services and services accustomed for students with disabilities.
For instance, districts with higher levels of poverty are spending about 30% less to deliver adequate education to their students, while districts with lower levels of poverty are spending more than what is needed to supply their students with adequate education. The districts with higher levels of poverty are not doing this on their accord however, it's due to the state funding models, such as the performance-based funding model, where it established an unrealistic academic output that the school fails to meet due to its rocky foundations influenced by inadequate funding to fulfill the special needs and barriers of their students.
In the article, How Many Matters states, a recent study evaluated the influence of adequacy-oriented school funding reforms during the 1990s and 2000s using data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. The researchers found that the reforms caused gradual increase in the relative achievement of students in low-income school districts, consistent with the goal of improving educational opportunity for these students.
They also note that with both Michigan and Massachusetts, both states have implemented significant reforms to their school financial system and maintained them for 10 plus years. Yet Michigan reforms made little to no progress, while Massachusetts kept a better balance between accountability and funding, but with slow progress.
Meanwhile, the Estonian government takes a better approach to their education. The article of Financing Quality Education for All States, the Estonian government committed itself to guaranteeing equal educational opportunities regardless of students' ethnic origin. Consequently, it established special counseling centers in order to guarantee the quality of instruction. Estonia having a balance for the comfort and needs of its students puts them at a pedestal. It's morally the right thing to do. The US attempts to make this balance, but does so poorly.
When schools receive low funding, students suffer as a result. They lack resources, qualified teachers, less advanced classes, less opportunities for futures, and overall are not provided a stable learning.
In the article, A Renewed Commitment for Leadership is School Social Work Practice, its author states that the limitations of state and local property tax reductions, as written in recent tax reform law, means a reduction in tax revenues, and thus lower funding for social welfare programs, including public education.
Underfunded schools are affected by these taxes based on the area they live in. In order to establish social welfare programs, these schools need more support. Lower tax revenues would also erode the acquisition of necessary resources to middle-class school systems that may likewise have low resources.
We did not choose these solutions because they're not fixing the problem at hand, but instead they're running away from the problem. For instance, letting students decide which school to attend may have the pro of, by technicality, students will have equal education opportunities since they are not longer restricted by the red zoning policies. But this has a big disadvantage of a lot of room of error. For instance, if the school is at max capacity, then the students are forced to attend a school that they don't care about, then they will lose all motivation to learn. Well, also, there's also a disadvantage that this will create an imbalance of students and teachers.
Another possible solution that we didn't take into consideration was to have all schools receive the same amount of money regardless of any circumstance. One pro to this is that it will abolish the funding disparity within the US. But some cons suggest that schools with a higher population wouldn't be able to get the necessary amount of resources needed, while schools with fewer students will get more resources compared to the students with a larger population. This would cause an imbalance. Money doesn't grow on trees, and political bodies would have to try to find ways to get more money in order to help these schools, either through increasing taxes or getting more money from the federal government. This could be hard depending on how progressive the state is.
Our solution was have political bodies responsible for education and devote more attention to minorities serving educational institutions.
A disadvantage to this is that the federal government already has restrictions set on stone. But with the 10th Amendment, the legislation in each state has a different view on implementing any rules or programs on the education. Because of the 10th Amendment, the federal government isn't allowed to invade other states and whenever they have a concern with their educational system.
And some of our advantages to that is that the minority serving educational institutions could have more representation and getting the necessary amount of resources that are needed for success. The second one is that any conflicting perspectives between the federal government, state, and local communities will be resolved during a discussion without having the issue of going through several stages before it is presented to the federal government. And the last one is that the federal government, state, and local communities can present several / different perspectives on how to handle / approach the problem and criticize each other, which minimizes the flaws in the solution.
Here are our citations.
Education sets the foundation for the future. Having focused on providing the same equal opportunities for all students in every state should be one of the major things legislators should focus on. Schools with a minority majority shouldn't be penalized for low performances and deserve as much representation and funding as non-minority majority schools.
Thank you. Chris, how did the group decide to include NEE's perspective into the overall presentation?
So NEE's focus on the economical aspects of our research question, and he provided a lot of visual graphs to help our viewers understand like the problem with the funding disparities within the U.S. It also emphasized that there is such a big gap within the funding disparities, and it